Representative Pendergraft.
Here.
Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Excused.
Chairman Bear.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Representative Pendergraft, would you please lead us in a word of prayer?
Lord, we
Thank you very much. Senator Ide, would you please come forward and present to us Senate File 96, the Wyoming Gold Act. So for the committee, just planning purposes, we're going to give this bill, because we've got considerable witnesses, until 9:15. And I'll keep an eye on the number of people that are going to testify. I know you don't see them in the room so much. They must all know about the comfort level of our chairs because they're visiting us online. We have several people. So I'll limit the testimony based on the time frame that we have, and I'll let everybody know based on who all shows up as we get into the public comment. Senator Ide, we appreciate you bringing this bill to us, and welcome to the House Appropriations Committee. We look forward to hearing about this bill. I enjoyed the debate about it last year. And since we have a limited time, just give us a quick overview and let's get into this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished members of the Appropriations Committee, thanks for having me today. I'll jump right into it here. We've got what is called the Wyoming Gold Act. And to try to shorten things up, I'll refer back in 2018, we got the Wyoming Legal Tender Act passed, and we helped a little bit with a good representative from Campbell County shepherd that when we were outside of the rope, so to speak. And what that did is made gold and silver legal tender in Wyoming, kind of reaffirmed the U.S. Constitution of making gold and silver legal tender. And what it also did is it took the taxes off of selling precious metals as well, too. So essentially what that bill did is it vaulted us to the top of the Sound Money Index that organization puts out nationally. So it's a good place to be. We're number one in the country, top 50. We're number one on sound money, and they kind of rank it by your laws of your state, essentially, and what you're doing. And so what this bill does is it builds on that Wyoming Legal Tender Act that was passed out of this chamber, or passed out of the Wyoming legislature in 2018. So I'll jump right into the bill here. That's a little backdrop on why I'm bringing this. The catch title there is pretty much explains that this is a short, little, quick bill. If you jump to page 2, section 1, Romanet I, or AI, is almost the entire bill, and I'll just read it. It requires the treasurer to hold not less than $10 million in specie and specie legal tender in the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund for the purpose of diversifying the state's investment portfolio, preserving capital, and ensuring against inflation, debt defaults, and other risks. Precious metals has been a reliable source of value without any counterparty risk for centuries, essentially. The rest of the bill, Romanet 2 there, just gives the opportunity to invest in precious metal leases or bonds. That's kind of secondary if the treasurer so true, they could earn, a yield on that. But the crux of this bill is to hold physical metal, in a depository preferably in Wyoming or a neighboring state. Gives the treasurer the treasurer on number B there, on section B there, the treasurer may contract for services with established precious metal firms and other industry experts to assist with the duties of the treasurer under this section. So basically he can talk to, the experts or depositories or who they're going to buy the metals from and look at what the fees are for storage and those sorts of things. On page 3, there was a few amendments that came out of the Senate, and we talked to everybody. It didn't hurt the bill. It was more on rulemaking. It was all pretty benign. And what was left out of that, we wanted to do a study. Utah did a study I shouldn't say Utah, the Beehive State, I guess, next door, without using proper names. And I've already got a copy of that, so it's essentially going to be the same thing. But that at the top of page 3, Sarah, the treasurer shall conduct a study that reviews methods for the state to begin accepting gold and silver as a payment medium. And what that's all about is what I wanted to get to there in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. It still says it's the only, constitutional money that we have. It's no state shall accept anything but gold and silver coin in payment of debt. So this kind of gets the plumbing set up with the treasurer to look to see how and give us a report in interim revenue to show us what they've learned and how we can start implementing that potentially. Who knows what's going to happen down the road with, the debt. Sovereign debt crisis potentially. So anyway, enough of that. Like I said, submit the results of that study by October 1st, 2025. And, essentially that's the bill. I mean, it's to require the treasurer not may or it shall acquire $10 million worth of gold. And it's just a small amount. All things considered, I was telling somebody the other day, we almost spent $5 million for training crossing guards the other day. And this is just a hedge against potential, it's an insurance policy, a strategic asset, getting away from dollar denominated investments like stocks and bonds and whatever else they have in their portfolio. So this is just a diversification more than anything. You've got a handout there. I wanted to go over that real quick just to give you a little history. This is 2 years old. This chart was ran this bill 2 years ago, and the national debt was $31.4 trillion. This was in 2023. I've got some numbers here. The price of gold was at $1,800. Now it's $2,900, but the national debt 2023 31.4 trillion. Now it's 36.4 trillion. That's another $5 trillion in debt in just 2 years. And I always like to tell the story. The first time our national debt went over $1 trillion was in 1980. We went 200 years without even crossing $1 trillion worth of national debt. And just last year, fiscal 2024, we deficit spent almost $2 trillion, $1.8 trillion. Almost in 6 months, we accumulated as much national debt as it took us in 200 years prior to that, from 1980 back to the founding of our country. So anyway, this just kind of shows you how gold is a check against deficit spending. And that's what it is. It's really, the gold price doesn't go up. It's the devaluing of our currency that goes down with putting more money into circulation. So all this is really, it's not really an investment. It's a strategic asset. It's a hedge against inflation. And CBO numbers, when I got this out of the Senate a couple of weeks ago, I had a CBO report, and there's projecting just status quo in 10 years from now, 2035, projection is another $24 trillion of national debt in just 10 more years, and that's with no recessions. Hopefully the Doge team can maybe make a dent in that, but I mean, just the interest on our debt right now is more than our defense spending. It's $1 trillion just in interest payments. So I'm trying to protect our state's wealth and our citizens' wealth, and that's what this is all about. And anyway, that's the bill. The other little graphic there on the back is just kind of to give people a little perspective on what the amount of what $1 trillion looks like stacked up, in $1 bills with an airplane flying, and that's only 1 trillion. I mean, we've got 36 and a projected another 24 in the next 10 years. So with that, committee members, I'll sit here and answer any questions for you if you'd like.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Questions for the senator? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I'm wondering this morning, did you bring any samples for us?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Sherwood, I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of did that on the floor next door. So we can't use props, and I would have loved to. So $10 million worth of gold bars, and good delivery bars are 400 troy ounce bars. And they're about 11 inches or about 7 inches by 3 inches by an inch and 3/4. And each one of those 400 ounce bars, I did the math on it last night just before I came here. One bar is worth $1,160,000. So we would only need 10 400 ounce good delivery bars to satisfy, this bill. And, if you wanted to look at an area, they're pretty small. They're 27.5 pounds, a 400 ounce bar. I wish I was going to try to get a fake one, so I had to bring in $1 million in here so you could see it. But it would effectively fit in one of these little trash cans, one of these little black trash cans sitting next to your desk. It doesn't take up much area. So that was a long answer to your question, but I'm glad you brought it up because I like to tell that story. I mean, a 400 ounce bar is not very big. Yeah, you probably couldn't pick that trash can up after 10 of them in there. It'd be almost 300 pounds, but yeah, it's a small storage area.
Well, Senator, I think the good rep really meant some gold foil covered dark chocolate, which would suffice for us. All right, go ahead, follow up, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 3 of the bill on the top there, it references the treasurer conducting a study.
Yes.
Do you anticipate a cost for that study, and would that be coming out of the 10 million allocation, or would there need to be an additional appropriation?
Senator Ide.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Sherwood, there was a little discussion about that in our committee, and there's really wasn't any fiscal note, obviously, and I think that like earlier in the bill where it says they can contract out with, professionals and that sort of thing, I think a lot of this can be done with just some of maybe the people that testify for no cost at all, really, to figure out how to do that. And if there is an appropriation, that would something that maybe have to be considered later on for that. But I think they may be able to just do that internally with contracting out with outside counsel on that. So how much that would be, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah.
Maybe a question for the department since we have them here.
Yeah.
Representative Alabant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ide, is there a depository in Wyoming that we could keep this to where we keep it within our own state?
Senator Ide.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Allamand, yeah, that's, I think you may have toured the one that's under construction. Casper has a Class 3 vault that a firm out of Arizona moved their business to Wyoming specifically, I shouldn't say specifically, but in large part because of our legal tender laws and our manufacturing laws in this state, you know, mining laws. They do manufacturing, and they actually mint the sovereign legal tender coin for 20 foreign countries. So it is a manufacturing facility, and I call it the Fort Knox of the West. I've toured it a few times, and they've just finished their Class 3 vault, and it's impressive. I'd love to get all of you guys up there, and they're so friendly to letting me bring people in. When I ran this bill a couple of years ago, they'd just sort of gotten started, and they're almost fully in operation. It'll be armed guards, everything authenticated locally there. They've got 50 full-time staff there right now in Casper, and there's a couple of neighboring states as well too. In Boise, there's a Class 3 vault, and then in Salt Lake City, Brinks Vault. So those are kind of the three neighboring or the three closest vaults to Wyoming or to Cheyenne. Yeah.
Okay. Representative Harrelson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ide, thanks for bringing this again and having this conversation again. I've always thought that diversification is the ticket. I think that's a great idea. My question is, 10 million, is that enough? I mean, if it was a spot price of $2,000 a troy ounce, we're at 312 pounds. Is that enough? I mean, I understand the concept. I understand this is like get our feet wet and move forward. But I also sit there and go, is it a situation where we want to maybe make a little bigger splash in that pond than 10 million? Could you kind of speak to how you landed on 10?
Senator Ide.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, I like that question a lot too. We tried to scale this down to, get things started, not scare everybody with a big number. And, this is a minimum. So we wanted to get something in the pipeline here and make a minimum, and everybody kind of learn what we're doing here, figure out where they want to store it, where the treasurer wants to store it, how maybe we can look at accepting, gold and silver as legal tender for payment of debts, possibly if the dollar goes to the confetti in 100 years, 50 years, 20 years, who knows, I guess. But to answer your question, the sound money index, you could really fall to the top of that index if you hold 10% of your state's reserves in precious metals, physical precious metals. So yeah, I would agree that it is a bare minimum. I mean, I did the math on it. Our 30 trillion or our $30 billion reserves here at the state, our sovereign wealth fund, effectively, if you take all of our reserves, you guys appropriations, this would be 0.0003 of that number. So it's a very small amount relative to what we have in reserves here. So I would entertain an amendment to make that higher, but if we can get that through, thank you. Does that answer your question, Representative? Yeah.
Representative Alaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know the temperature of the water on this bill. If we amended it to 100 million, would it hurt this bill? And would it not have the traction that I think it does now?
Senator Ide.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Alaman, it's another good question. I think the Treasurer's Office, they're sympathetic to what we're trying to do here. Wading into it with a larger number, I think it may be pushback on, when you get more people involved in the debate. Obviously, I think a bigger number would be more of an insurance policy, but that would be, it would probably be a little harder going, to conference committee on that. But that's That's not my decision. We're starting out with this $10 million, and I think it's maybe a good way to get everybody sort of, educated on what this is all about.
Further questions for the senator? I would say that the body of the House has certainly changed from last year when we saw this bill, but I don't think that the legislature in general has changed that significantly, would be my interpretation of that question and where the body sits. But I have to say, it's if I'm reading this right from your paperwork, we've seen a 33% increase in the value of gold since 2023. Is that accurate? From $1,900 to $2,900
Yeah, I think it's.
since 23?
Mr. Chairman, well, 1,800 to 2,900, I think that's actually over 50% in 2 years.
Well, 50%, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
33% of the current value, but yeah, you're right, 50% increase, you're
Yeah.
right.
So,
Very, very impressive for an investment, had we been invested in gold. But there is a cost, and I assume that the study is where you're trying to figure out the fees, the cost of storage, of maintaining the security of it, exchanging in and out if the treasurer were to determine that he needed to add more, subtract, if wanted to turn it into cash for a certain need that we had, that type of thing. So, or do you have an idea of what storing this in Wyoming would cost?
Mr. Chairman, you guys are all hitting on the highlights that I like to hear. Some of the storage facilities that we've talked to, just to help answer that question, I think some of the people zooming in today to testify, but the number that I've been presented with is, depending on where it is about 25 basis points. So we had that discussion in the Senate, and that question was brought up as well too, and everybody was kind of saying, well, that 25 basis points seems like pretty high storage. But if you look at just the last 2 years, if we'd have had $10 million 2 years ago and it went up 50%, $10 million, that storage fee on $10 million is $25,000 a year. So over 2 years, that's $50,000, and that gain would have been $5 million. Is that correct? So you'd have $15 million. So your storage fee is $50,000 versus a $5 million gain. That's a pretty small storage fee for those kind of returns. And to hit on that question too, Mr. Chairman, that's and a lot of this is driven by the deficit spending and the debt. And as long as that keeps going, gold is a check against that devaluation. And so, until we balance the budget in Washington, it looks like a good, safe place to diversify the portfolio. And those fees are relatively small compared to a lot of stock and bond, investment managers, if you want to look at it that way.
Senator, we could debate on whether or not central banks really have an inside track on where the direction is going in an economy, but what have the central banks of this country and the world, for that matter, been doing in regards to precious metals?
Mr. Chairman, they're hoarding it hand over fist right now. The central banks of the world, China, Russia, all of them are, in the last 50 years, they're accumulating more gold on their balance sheet than they ever have in the last 50 years. And, I think there again, you'll probably hear more testimony that it's, the BRICS nations, they're looking at maybe back in the yuan, potentially with precious metals to compete with the dollar. Those are some of the backdrops going on worldwide. And that is something concerning, because they know all of the world's currencies are backed by nothing. And, the dollar is really the best horse in the glue factory right now of all of the other currencies. And, essentially because we are the reserve currency and, oil is traded in dollars. And, but, the way they weaponized the dollar a little bit with Russia when the Ukraine thing went on, everybody's nervous about that. And so foreign countries are looking to back their currencies with gold, essentially. Yeah.
Any further questions for the bringer? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up public comment. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone in the room? Let's, please have the department come up. And Ms. Williams, we appreciate your being here. From the Treasurer's Office, please give us, watching the time here, if you can give us 5 to 8 minutes of your time and just let us know your thoughts on this particular issue.
Very good. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Committee. I'm Dawn Williams, the Deputy State Treasurer. I'm also joined by Patrick Fleming, who's our Chief Investment Officer this morning virtually. He's going to speak to the more specifics of investment with gold, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the testimony that we heard already. Representative Harrelson asked a question about diversification. Of course, that is a primary goal of what asset allocation is for investment of states funds, to which Patrick he'll address that a little bit more. But our goal, our mandate is to invest at the highest risk-adjusted rate of return. So the reason we don't invest in gold, why our professional advisors, the SLIB, all of the folks who make those decisions about what we should invest in and what we should diversify with, is because we don't receive a return on gold, on physical gold. And we will someday, but those are like unrealized gains on stocks. You can't spend money that you haven't made. So that's one of the reasons that we have the authority to invest in gold specie right now. Our investment funds committee and our team of professionals choose not to invest in gold because of some of those reasons. We're required to make distributions. Again, there's no gold there. What physical gold holding specie will do, it costs us money rather than it makes us money. Eventually, obviously, that will cause returns, but that's not our mandate. We have to be able to distribute funds for operations of state government. We have, as for the study, there is no appropriation, as Representative Sherwood pointed out. It does, the authority to contract for services is in section 1, and it says we can contract for services under this section for those services. The study is in section 2, so we do not have an appropriation to do a study. I also don't think, Mr. Chairman, that this study is appropriate for our office. This is going to affect county treasurers, of which we have no authority over county treasurers. We don't really work with county treasurers. If they're going to be collecting money, this is a Department of Revenue issue. How is the Department of Revenue, who's going to handle the collection of this, how are they going to value someone's tender that they bring in the office? And what happens to the amount of money when you come in and you say, okay, today your taxes are worth $100, and you give me the gold and we value it at $4.20, I'm just making numbers up. And then by the time they're sending it to the state, it's now valued at $4.15. Who pays the transaction cost? There's just a lot of things I should let the experts talk to you about that. So we have in short, Mr. Chairman, the Treasurer's Office is opposed to this bill. And if the Treasurer were here, he would tell you that the reason is because we have a team of investment professionals. We have a team of advisors who are integral in that creation and formulation of our asset allocation. We work with the state 5 elected officials for that asset allocation. Once the legislature starts telling us and what to do, how to invest, with that specificity. Next time, our concern, our fear is that the next bill will be invest in a certain coal company, invest this much in a certain oil company, don't invest in this company. With that specificity, it just opens a door. And so, Mr. Chairman, let me please turn it over to Patrick Fleming, our CIO.
All right, Ms. Childress, can we get Mr. Fleming on? Mr. Fleming, welcome to House Appropriations. We appreciate your being here. If you could opine and keep it to 5 minutes, we'd really appreciate it. We'd like to hear a lot of testimony on this particular issue today.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for having me. It's Patrick Fleming, CIO from the Treasurer's Office. Whenever I talk about this, first I want to differentiate my personal beliefs as opposed to what is best for the state. And as Deputy Williams mentioned, the highest risk-adjusted return in what the fund is looking at. So just so you know, we can buy gold right now. That is part of it. We've done asset allocation studies through our consultant, through our IFC, through our SLIB, and everyone has at that point decided there are better alternatives than gold. So, one of the biggest things is performance. So we talk about the last 2 to 3 year performance, but if you look at 1, 5, 10, 20, and 30 years, gold has underperformed the S&P 500. It's only that 3-year window where gold has outperformed. And if you look at it over a 30-year period, gold has underperformed the S&P 500 by 1,534%. Let's go for a shorter time. Let's go to 10 years, 158%, 158% underperformance. The other part of it that people don't realize when we're doing these calculations, you have to look at the risk-adjusted return, i.e. the volatility of the return. Gold is 3 times more volatile than stocks. So not only would you not have the stock performance, but it would be 3 times as bad because what you want to do is have the same volatility of the investments. As Deputy Williams mentioned, gold doesn't have a dividend. As you know, we have a 5% spending policy, maybe 4.5%. So that really dictates many of investments that we're looking at, what makes sense to be able to pay those dividends. Obviously, stocks pay dividends. You can lend gold, but typically the lending, unless we don't lend anything without U.S. Treasury securities. There's a cost to doing so. We've looked at it before. It's very problematic to do that. As far as the portfolio, this is something that we're completely aware of. We understand the problems with the U.S. deficit, where the dollar is, everything else. We have over $4 billion in non-dollar securities for a hedge against dollar devaluation. We also have inflation protected securities, like a TIPS. We have hard assets. We have many, many different things that do very well in inflationary periods where you don't have to do that. So big picture wise, there's definitely, gold has its attributes, but historically you'd be hard pressed, especially when you look at that risk adjusted return. Because how we look at it is you're looking at what's called a Sharpe ratio. And the Sharpe ratio of gold is really poor versus the Sharpe ratio of equities. So just from that's one of the big things why we would not hold gold. So you look at it and go, oh, great, 2 to 3 years ago, it's done wonderful. Yes, but that's the only period over a 1, 3, 5, 7, 10, 20, 30-year period that it's outperformed. So with that, I'll cut it as quick. I know you're rushing out of time. I'll stand for questions.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Fleming or Ms. Williams? Go ahead, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Fleming, thank you for being here. I guess my question is this. I definitely hear what you're saying about the investment concept that it is very much, it's 312 pounds in a safe somewhere. That's what it is. And there could be a realized gain someday, but it's not going to be something you can put on a piece of paper, really. It's gonna hold that up. But this is the concern that I have. If you look at where our nation's gone, you look at the devaluing of our dollar, you look at what we've created, there's a point where what would happen if the US dollar devalued at an extreme rate to the point where we lost the dollar as a marketable currency on the world scene? What would happen to our investments? I understand you said you invest in some other things, but as a whole, what would happen if that were to take place? Let's say that the dollar went from being a leading currency on the world scene to being worth 10 cents to the dollar or even 5 cents to the dollar, which is a potential as we see the OPEC nations jockeying and other things happening. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Mr. Fleming?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Representative, yeah, great question. I've done a lot of studies about this. You look at reserve currencies, there's been five different reserve currencies in the world over time. Most recent ones would be, the Dutch guilder and British pound sterling that were reserve currencies and what happened over the time. You look at it, and even with our debt levels right now, the dollar index is almost at 108, extremely high. So you still are seeing that there's a tremendous amount of interest in the dollar. We're about 20% overvalued on a purchasing power parity index. The dollar is extremely strong, even with all of these other issues. So if you look at that, let's just say something happened, the dollar devalued, interest rates would go up significantly, but you do need other assets that would do well. So when interest rates go up, inflation would be higher. All of those other securities, our non-dollar assets, would do well in that situation. Also, we can buy and sell those in a day. Whereas when you're holding it in specie, it's harder to do those types of security transactions. The reason why Russia and China have been dumping or been buying gold is because they're dumping treasuries. So, when we put on the sanctions on Russia, they had over 200 billion in U.S. treasuries. They dumped it all. What did they do? They bought gold. China continues. They're just selling treasuries, and they're buying gold and other assets too. They buy other non-dollar securities. There's not enough gold in the world to satiate that. There's only 3.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools of all gold in the world. So there's just not enough of it to satiate these large structures of governments to do so. So, they're, the cleanest dirty shirt, the whatever analogy you want to use, they're just not those types of viability of other currencies out there to make up for it.
Follow-up for the questions for Patrick Fleming. Follow-up, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that. And thanks for the education. I do appreciate it. Utah just announced 100 million in gold reserves. I just was reading on it. Can you speak to that? I mean, there are other people, Texas, Utah, there's a number of states, 14 states have gone where gold and silver are legal tender. There is a movement towards this around the country. Can you kind of speak to that and what's going on in those realms?
Mr. Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes. And, as I said, the differentiation between being a CIO and personally speaking or whatever, but if, really what purpose are you looking to achieve? If it's to hedge out the portfolio of, some of these things, as you mentioned earlier in your testimony, $10 million, we have almost $31 billion. That's not going to do it. If we're looking for hedging out Armageddon, we should be buying, guns and butter, as the old economic analogy. Gold would not matter. You need guns and you need food. So really, what are you trying to hedge out and trying to do? So as a token amount to do this, I would be hard pressed to really say that if that is a belief, that would happen. And then also, if we are talking about Armageddon, what's the viability of these safes? We've looked into this. We've done a lot of studies. Every safe you can break into. The whole thing with a Class 3 safe is the amount of time that you have that somebody would have to break into the safe before somebody could come in to stop the robbers. That's all it is. And so, with something like that, it delays the time, but anyone can break into a safe. And so if you're talking about Armageddon, would you really be able to protect this and everything else? So there's just, a bunch of different ways to do it. And we feel that the structure that we have right now, that, unless it's overnight Armageddon, we have all kinds of different things to protect the states and its assets.
Representative Pendergrass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fleming, you mentioned $4 billion in non-dollar securities. Could you perhaps expand on that a little bit for us? And I'm presuming that because the issue with gold was you didn't have a regular cash out. How does it work with these securities?
Mr. Fleming.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative. So what we look at, the vast majority would be in other other currencies, global currencies in the world. The euro is by far the number one holding, followed by the Japanese yen. That's another large holding. But also we have other assets. We have non-dollar real estate. So not only real estate does very well in times of high inflation. So that would be something that not only pays interest, but also is not denominated in US dollars. So all of these different securities that you would have, if the dollar fell apart and devalued or what have you, then you would see these other securities go up significantly. And when we're looking at a total portfolio, that's what what I was saying. 10 million really wouldn't do anything, where 4 billion would hedge us against a dollar devaluation. So we have all kinds of Monte Carlo simulations to look at all these things, and we come up with what's called an efficient frontier to try and maximize the risk-adjusted return under these various scenarios. And that's what we do every year. And all of you would be, more than welcome to join us when we do our asset allocation meeting with the SLIB and go over these and opine upon what you feel is a better investment than what we're looking at.
Further questions for the department? All right, I have just one comment and sort of a question. I understand your mission is to create the best revenues possible for the state and then allow the legislature to then expend those profits. And I also, both personally and for the sake of the financial soundness of the state, think that this is not a bad idea to have investments in these precious metals. But it did not fall on deaf ears when the treasurer stated that, we need to control spending. He put in his budget that he'd like to see the legislature put some constraints on itself. I believe in House Bill 270 and 271, we actually did put some constraints that should hopefully allow your department to make some better investments and then profit to a much higher extent and hopefully lead to better revenue streams for both education spending and general government. But having said that, this bill doesn't really work in the direction of what I'm thinking is that the legislature needs to decide if it wants to spend some of its money on gold, that it do so. But I think that the treasurer's office and the investment team would probably be the best place to put that gold once they made that purchase. Would you agree with that statement? And having said that, I still think that this is probably a worthwhile effort to advance this. But later on, we probably need to come back with a policy that would be, if the legislature wants to spend some money on gold, do so, and you guys hold it for us. Would that be something that would be more amiable than just demanding that you invest in gold?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And WRS, for instance, they do have a gold investment. So as we said, all of these various other states that do have investments, you have the ability, to do whatever you want with them. But unless you're talking about Armageddon, which even if it is, as I was saying, it would be very hard, I believe, to actually do it unless it's physically on your body. But for us to be able to buy and sell it in a nanosecond, to me, is extremely important. So where you know that you have it, you're able to trade it. So if you were to do this, and we were able to do this in the market, there's Sprott Physical Gold. There's all kinds of different places that you can do this and take delivery. I could buy a future and take delivery of gold. So there's many different ways of doing this that would enable us to do the same thing if that's something that you wanted to, in a much more effective way than doing it, putting it into a vault in Wyoming, Idaho, or Salt Lake.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. All right, I'm going to open it up to, well, we have no other electeds here or online, correct? So is there anyone in the room that would like to testify to this bill? Seeing none, we'll go to online. And let's just start at the top and work our way down, Ms. Childress. Let's start with Mr. Fair. And we're going to limit this public testimony to, got 6, let's do 5 minutes each, as soon as we get Mr. Fair on. Mr. Fair, welcome to the House Appropriations Committee. We appreciate your being here to testify on the Wyoming Gold Act. We're going to give you 5 minutes. Please introduce yourself to the committee and give us your thoughts on this bill.
Sure. I'm in support. My name is Josh Fair. I live in Casper, Wyoming for the last 2.5 years. I've been in the metals industry for more than 20 years. Previously did risk management for gold, silver, and copper mining companies. And over the last 16 plus years, I have a company called Scottsdale Mint, which manufactures legal tender coins for roughly 20 foreign governments and central banks. It also produces gold and silver that are stored in some of the huge banks in Canada, that are stored in the bank branches. A lot of the products that say the Canadian bank name is made right here in Wyoming. My other company, the Wyoming Reserve, is a institutionally driven storage facility, and I can cover a little bit of that in a few minutes here. So obviously, I'm in support of this. My movement to Wyoming, as Senator Bob Ide mentioned, was because of the Wyoming Legal Tender Act a number of years ago. My company would not be here operating without that passing. So I appreciate the wise thought long term of what's happening. Because of my work with both government, central banks, wholesalers, just all over the world, we see what's happening with the flows all around. And so at a high level, a lot of people don't know what's going on in the gold industry, but London is being dramatically reduced the amount of gold that's in London, and it's coming to the United States in record fashion. Ever since Trump was essentially won the election, things have been changing quite rapidly to the point where it's causing a lot of concerns within Europe, and there's shortages of gold. It's now taking roughly 2 months to get gold out of Europe into the United States. We don't know exactly who is bringing in the gold. It is the banks, but the banks represent governments and central banks. The new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he talks about monetizing the asset side of the balance sheet for the American people. Right now, the United States is the largest holder of gold in the world, but it has it marked in their internal model at $42 an ounce. Obviously, it's at $2,900 roughly. So for some reason, record amount of gold is coming to the United States. It's being repatriated. So I'd say it's an exciting time to see what's going on. As mentioned, there has been a movement with the BRICS countries. They have been buying gold for years, and they're trying to challenge the United States, the US dollar, as a reserve currency of the world. So I think what is happening now all across the world is they're increasing how much gold that they're putting on their balance sheets. And if we look at Wyoming, as we're essentially sovereign in most ways, except its own currency. We can't control the US dollar. And so if we look at what the biggest sovereign wealth funds are doing in the world, they're adding gold in record fashion. And I know the public is generally unaware of what's taking place. But gold is actually a constitutional standard. So it's not about just making money. And I understand that's the mission of an investment officer. But gold is looked at as really something it's a war chest of the people's money. It's the capital. And so I think we've got another panelist that'll be coming on that will explain of how other states are looking at things and why things are changing so rapidly just in the last few months. So this is not so much of a look back. This is what is taking place going forward. There are 14 states working on various bills. I mean, Texas even built their own gold depository a few years ago. So you're seeing Texas really is kind of a leader. Obviously, Alaska has quite a bit. Utah they're starting with 100 million, and they're going to continue to grow it. Ohio owns gold. New York owns gold, and like was stated, a lot more will be doing it. You can actually buy physical metal and store it for cheaper than you can hold it in an ETF over a period of time. My recommendation would be that the state of Wyoming could interview a number of the bullion banks. These are the TD banks, the Wells Fargos, the JP Morgans of the world, and they're able to basically essentially buy it, and you can sell that. As I know there was previous testimony that it's hard. It is not. You can sell that physical position. It's guaranteed. for weight and purity through the banks, and they will buy it back in that instant. So it's a very liquid, instrument to own. And at the same time, but it has to be within what I call the circle of trust. And that's where, again, there was some misunderstanding of what is a Class 3 vault. It's not just the rating of the vault. It's all about having a facility that has the armed guards and has the ratings and has all the policies, the procedures, X-ray machines for the employees going in and out, metal detection, all those things. And then also independent third-party audits. And at the end of the day, it's all about insurance. So these things are full, while anything can be stolen, you can sell that risk with insurance. So part of that storage fee, and the biggest piece of that is the insurance component. And it, like I
Mr. Fair?
mentioned, actually a cheaper way to hold. Yes.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. I apologize for that, but I thank
Sure.
you for being brief, and we want to open it up to questions for the committee for you.
Sure.
Are there any questions for Mr. Fair? Mr. Fair, it seems to me, from what little research I've done on this subject, that your facility is really the only one that would come close to being able to do what we're asking the treasurer to do in the state of Wyoming, and that would be to store a small amount of gold for the state. Have you looked at what it would take to store $10 million in your facility as far as cost for the state?
Yeah, I think, just as a concept of gold, you're probably looking at roughly 0.25% a year is just a ballpark rate. Obviously, that number, can move a little bit, but that's somewhat around an industry standard of what it is. We're ready. We have way more in value already in the facility. We're set up for billions of dollars. This is a world-class facility that is set up for sovereign governments, for states, banks. We've got an armored car. The largest independent transport company is moving and putting a location in at my facility to operate for banks, for refineries, to move metal. They're going to handle the U.S. Mint already out of Denver, based out of Casper. So I think this is a pretty. We're ready for this. I didn't build this for the state of Wyoming, but I built it for my other clients all over the world.
Mr. Fair, this 25 basis points, and I understand a lot of that's based on insurance, but if the volume increases, does the cost go down?
It obviously can. That's right. So everything's negotiated. Insurance rates can change year to year as to what's going on. Right now, we're working with a number of groups that have too much metal in New York, and so there's a concentration risk. Some of these vaults now have more than $30 billion in one single location. So right now, Wyoming's looking really good for a geographic diversity. Jurisdiction matters, and absolutely, as volumes grow, you're able to tighten up that rate, and it does get more attractive. And that essentially the state could have its own section within the vault, its own cage, and so the state could even have its own camera on its metal, and could be there present for all the audits, everything that's there, and then work in conjunction with the bank. So you've got a lot of checks and balances, and at the end of the day, it's fully insured.
Thank you very much. All right, we appreciate your being here.
Yeah, thank
Mr.
you.
Childress, would you please move on to Mr. Cavatani? Mr. Cavatani, welcome to Wyoming's House Appropriations Committee. We appreciate your being here. We are limiting testimony to 5 minutes, so if you could be brief and just tell us your thoughts on the Wyoming Gold Act.
Yes, great. And thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me join today, giving me the opportunity to speak. So I'm Joe Cavatoni, and I'm with the World Gold Council, and we're a global organization that's not for profit. It's a membership organization made up of the world's largest gold mining and streaming companies. And our focus is to provide, and I'm excited to talk about this because this is the exact type of environment that we would flourish in. We provide education, information, insights, and the data that's needed for an organization or a group of organizations to come together and make the right decision about investing, owning, and how to go about deploying their interest in gold. So we provide information, as an example, the case for gold, which talks to the return profiles And I know Mr. Fleming spoke to certain numbers in the past, et cetera. I think what's healthy for us to do is to circulate our current case for gold and show you exactly how gold's done in line with equities, in line with risk assets over the last 20, 30, 15, 10 years. We can look at all the different information, but not only just looking at returns, but looking at it in the context with which he spoke, which is risk adjusted. We look at returns, the kind of value and diversification benefits a portfolio is provided by adding gold to the portfolio. But we also look at liquidity, which is an item that I know is very important for anyone in the investment community and highlighted by Mr. Fleming. But we can talk about how you can access the $175 billion gold market that trades on a day-to-day basis. Now, our interest in the bill is to simply say what we have to offer is analysis, including portfolio review with and to complement that work that may be getting done by some of the independent consultants, and actually to share as well the insights we have from working with other states like Utah, Alaska, Texas, and others, where they've made and actually deployed gold allocations, including your WRS system, which is approved for up to 4% allocation. So we've done the work with them as well. And then also share insights as to what really is happening at the central bank level, which has been a 14-year trend of net buying by central banks and about 1,000 tons per year over the last 3 years. So yes, they're diversifying their risk and their reserve portfolios into gold for a number of reasons. Not only the weaponization of the dollar and the fear of what could happen with it, but for homegrown risk and concerns they have about inflation. We do an annual study, and we work with organizations like Banque de France, Central Bank in the Philippines, and also Central Bank of Turkey. We can share those insights with you and help you make that decision and complete that analysis that I think would be super important for you to get your comfort and confidence together around moving forward and how best to move forward with gold. So whether it's how to do it, how to look at it in a portfolio context, or insights on how others are doing it, that's what we're here to offer. And that was why I submitted my request to participate today, as giving that information and helping you understand what's available to you. Again, free of charge from the World Gold Council. It's what we do and how we go about helping the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cavatani. Questions for Mr. Cavatani? Mr. Cavatani, I have one. One of the things that makes gold valuable and increase in value is the scarcity of it. But we had a recent discovery in the news in China of gold. And from my perspective, I have not seen the price go down since we've had this increase. I know there are a lot of other factors that impact the price of gold, but what are your thoughts on this new discovery of a large volume of gold in China? And what do you anticipate being the reason for gold still holding strong on price, even though we've had this new discovery?
So I'm going to answer that question back to front. So the demand for gold right now is adding diversification to portfolios from investors on a global scale. Secondly, central banks continuing diversification of their reserve portfolios, particularly the emerging market central banks who have concerns about their currency as well as the dollar and their holdings of treasuries. And then third, a growing small component that's actually in the technology space. And I would actually say one of the questions asked earlier today about whether there's gold in the room or not, there is a little bit in each one of your phones there. So yes, you've got it in the room. But ultimately, those demand profiles have continued to be very strong as people are looking at the metal in a monetary context. And it is outpacing the speed and the production levels that are coming from the mining community. And we produce a report on a quarterly basis, which I would encourage everybody to see, which breaks down every component of traceable, trackable gold being consumed and the supply that feeds it. Now, when it comes to a discovery, as we've seen or heard about in China, there's a lot of things to unpack there. First, how true really is the news? Second, how easily accessible can it be? And then third, what is that long timeline to bring online a new mining track and bring it into production? That could be something that could take as long as 10, maybe 20 years. So while it might seem exciting and interesting, that news in its own right has little or no bearing on the 2% supply growth that we see in production today. This is turning a mine strike, so to speak, a discovery in the ground into production. That's a 20-year project if it's true. And that's, I think, something else that needs to be carefully managed. It's easy to say we think we found a lot of gold. When you actually turn it into production, that could take a long time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, seeing no further questions, thank you for being here, and we'll move on to Mr. Ethorn.
Mr. Ethorn, if you will turn on your video and unmute.
Ms. Childress, if you would go ahead and let's move on to Mr. Cortez.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cortez is not online, but
Okay.
Stephen Gleason is.
Let's move on to Mr. Gleason then.
Okay. Oh, there is Mr. Ethorn now.
All right, if you can go ahead and get Mr. Gleason lined up so he's ready to go. Mr. Ethorn, welcome to House Appropriations Committee. We appreciate your being here. Please introduce yourself and let us know your thoughts on the Wyoming Gold Act.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I am Mike Ethorn, a Wyoming resident of 45 years. I am the Wyoming Area Manager for Alpine Gold Exchange, headquartered out of Alpine, Utah. I am here today to express my support for the Gold Act. I have been a precious metal investor for over 30 years, and I have seen firsthand the benefits of owning gold and silver. As many of you know, precious metals are a safe haven asset that has historically performed well, especially during periods of economic uncertainty. It is also a proven hedge against inflation, which is a major concern for many Wyomingites that I talk to on a daily basis. In fact, I would bet that many of you in this room own gold and silver, and maybe even gold backs. So my question to you would be, if your constituents own precious metals, and many of you own it as well, then why would it not make sense for the state of Wyoming to do the same? I believe that it makes good sense to diversify a portion of the state's holdings and/or reserves into an asset class that protects the people's buying power, which in turn provides a hedge against inflation. The only way to protect taxpayers' money is to hold real money, sound money. The Gold Act would help strengthen and further support the Wyoming Legal Tender Act passed in 2018. Sound money not only protects against inflation, but also against government overreach. And lastly, sound money is a check on government spending. For these reasons, I urge passage of the Gold Act out of the committee, and I ask for your full support of this much-needed legislation for the benefit of the Wyoming people. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Ethorn. Questions for Mr. Ethorn? Mr. Ethorn, you just said it's a check on government spending. I'm very interested in putting checks on government spending. Could you please explain that comment?
Well, with the rising cost of inflation, everything costs more, and we have to spend more to get the same result as a government entity, and that is true in every household across Wyoming. So that's how I'd explain that.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your being here.
Sure.
Ms. Childress, do we have Mr. Gleason on? Mr. Gleason, welcome to Wyoming House Appropriations Committee. We appreciate your being here. Please introduce yourself to us and tell us your thoughts on the Wyoming Gold Act. We are limiting your comments to 5 minutes, so if you could be brief, please.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Stephen Gleason, and I've been in the precious metals industry for 15 years. I'm the owner and operator of the largest Class 3 vault in North America on the private side. We're based in Idaho, 9,000 square foot Class 3 vault, a 40,000 square foot facility, and we store already over or about $1 billion worth of precious metals for banks, individuals, businesses, and so forth. We're one of several facilities in the region that Wyoming is blessed to have. Obviously, there's one in Wyoming, and then there's two in Idaho, and there's one also in Salt Lake City, and there may even be another. I know there's one in Nevada, although I don't think that's contiguous. I have testified in the last few years. I've testified at least 2 or 3 times in Wyoming, and it's been really interesting to watch over the last 5 years as this topic continues to come up and the state continues to unfortunately not have any gold holdings. And unfortunately, the Treasurer's Office continues to come out and testify, often with misinformation, which tells me that to an extent, they're not really seriously looking at this. For example, the Sharpe ratio comment I heard earlier talks about risk-adjusted return. Well, the idea of gold is that it's a non-correlated asset. And so what you do is you add it to a portfolio of stocks and bonds. And when you do that, you find that the overall portfolio has a higher risk-adjusted return because of gold in it, as opposed to not being in it, because of its features as a non-correlated asset. And so you can't look at things as individual silos, you add it to the mix. And on that basis, gold is a benefit to a portfolio. And I'm sure the World Gold Council can help with providing this kind of backup, just as they do to central banks all over the world and states. And to that extent, we are seeing, as it's been mentioned, many states have been moving in this direction. Some already own physical gold, including Utah, including Ohio. Texas has at varying times. Many other states have legislation like this. Sometimes it's permissive, sometimes it's a mandate. In this case, you have many years of the state has had this authority but hasn't been doing it. And I think, this is necessary at this point to have a small mandate so that the state gets itself up to speed once and for all on how this works. And one thing that will also be found, I think, very quickly is that contrary to testimony that I've heard from the Treasurer's Office in the past, it's highly efficient to acquire gold. The liquidity is instant. We're talking about kilo gold bars and so forth. These are instantly liquid. They are stored at very low cost, lower in many cases than the transaction costs or the management fees that the state is paying on various bond funds and other things that it's acquired. So in the case of gold, it was mentioned 25 basis points. It in many cases is less than that. And the actual insurance cost with Lloyd's of London, at least in my facility, is under 10 basis points. And so, this can be stored in these facilities for less than 25 basis points. The cost of buying and selling gold in these larger quantities in these liquid forms is also very low, 10 basis points, perhaps even less, depending on market conditions. I think you might find that some of the folks even involved in this hearing would be doing things at cost simply because they believe in this as something that states should do and would like to help facilitate that. So I think that this is appropriate. This idea about the localities collecting gold and silver and having to deal with it, I don't think this bill requires any of that. There was a prior bill a couple years ago that did, but I'm not sure that that's a feature of this bill here. So I was surprised to hear that come up because it's another red herring, and I think that we're hearing. So I think this is a very reasonable small step. And once the state takes this small step and the treasurer gets up to speed and gets assistance from people both within Wyoming, the World Gold Council, or other professionals in the space, I think they're going to find this is very easy to do. It's very cost efficient. And I think, to the other representatives' comments about the appropriate amount, 10 million is a very small amount. But I think what we're seeing is a necessity of getting the state off the dime. And I think that's what this bill does. So obviously, I very much support it.
Thank you, Mr. Gleason, and I appreciate those last comments there, getting it off the dime. I think that is the goal of this bill, and I appreciate your pointing that out. Questions for Mr. Gleason? Seeing none, we really appreciate your being here and letting us know your thoughts on this. All right, is there anyone else in the room that'd like to comment on this? Good senator over there. All right, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move to pass by Harrelson, second by Alaman. All right, we'll work the bill. Okay, page 1. Page 2. Representative Pendergraft.
Mr. Chairman, again, I'd kind of like to test the temperature of the group here. Page 2, line 3, I would suggest an amendment that after the numerical 10 million states, but no more than 50 million.
Okay, so to put a upper limit on it for this bill, all right. Is there a second? That fails for lack of second. Okay. I appreciate you bringing that potential amendment. I'll just tell you that I think you all caught my comment there that this probably needs to be more of a spending policy than an investment policy. I think it would probably fit better, but we do have this bill, and I hope that this bill moves forward because I think this is the mechanism we have right now. Okay, go ahead, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You just hit something that I caught out of earlier testimony when we were talking about, diversification. And this particular chunk doesn't make distributions for regular spending. And quite frankly, that kind of piqued my interest.
Mm-hmm. Well, the treasurer did want us to control that spending. That plays along those lines. All right. Any other discussion on page 2? Moving on to page 3. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try again.
Okay.
We often do studies, and sometimes I think the studies are superfluous. So I guess I would just test the temperature of the committee. I would suggest an amendment that would strike lines 1 through 10 on page 3.
Okay. Seconded by Sherwood. Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So wondering if we want to strike it or if we want to just slide it to the Department of Revenue to have the conversation. I'm not so sure this shouldn't be a conversation we have, just not sure if it should go through the treasurer's office, as we heard in testimony. So just to add that in as a conversation piece.
It's a good point, Representative. I think we would have to change the long title. This one says specifically, it speaks to the treasurer. We'd need to add that in there. I think it really, and I'm not sure why the other chamber added this, and I believe that was the testimony, wasn't it, Senator Ide, that this was an amendment onto the bill?
Mr. Chairman, no, it was actually, there was another study in there on how to balance a portfolio and that sort of thing that got amended out of the bill. But this was in the original bill, and it was left in there just to do a study on, looking at how the state could potentially accept, specie legal tender like the U.S. Constitution says in Article 1. Yeah.
Since we have you back at the dais, how would you see this amendment to strike this study? Would that be a friendly amendment to the bill? It certainly would simplify it and streamline the bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I understand the concerns, especially from the treasurer's office. And maybe I misspoke a little bit earlier. I was just recalling my testimony. I think I mentioned that they were sympathetic. I think they're sympathetic to precious metals, but just not the avenue that we're taking here is in sort of being pressured to do something that is not really what they consider what they want to do. So anyway, just to back that up a little bit, I would still, could be a friendly amendment if it could be moved, as the good representative said, over there somewhere else potentially, but it would be, I think, be good for us, for everybody to know what it looks like to start accepting precious metals as legal tender and payment of debts to the state, essentially. So that, I don't know if that's a firm answer or not, but that's what I would say.
Good enough. All right. Representative Harrelson, are you interested in amending the amendment?
I would be. So, Mr. Chairman, on page 3, line 1, it would read, the Department of Revenue shall conduct, and then on page 3, line 5, it shall say again, the Department of Revenue shall submit. And then going down through as I can see, that would, I'm just making sure that and I believe that would bring it into a different realm. And then looking at our title, the title reads, an act relating to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act requiring the state treasurer to hold and invest specie and specie legal tender, which I believe is still in the purview of this bill if it were to hold that amendment, and then authorizing the state treasurer to hire consultants, which probably still would be in this, I'm not 100% sure on that, but then requiring a study and report and providing for effective dates. So I actually think that our title does still cover this, even shifting to Department of Revenue. And I stand for any, if there's a second, I mean, we can discuss it, but I feel that it does cover what needs to be covered.
Okay, you've heard the motion, seconded by Pendergraft, meaning it's a friendly amendment. And any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still looking at this, and I'm wanting to streamline the process to more of a directive toward the Department of Revenue rather than go out and study it, report back to us. I guess I'm leaning toward the direction of this is what we want you to do, figure it out.
Okay, any other comments? Representative Alaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to be against this amendment because I believe it's our treasurer who handles our money. The Department of Revenue is supposed to bring it in, and then the treasurer is supposed to handle it and save it for us. So I think I'm going to be against this amendment and try and keep it to the state treasurer. Thank you.
Okay, I think the point of the study and it's going to the joint revenue, it would be going to the Joint Revenue Committee. So it is a revenue issue. And it says for the state to begin accepting gold and silver as payment, which is the revenue. So I think it's appropriate to be in the Department of Revenue. To the bringer of the amendment, to the amendment's comments, I would say probably changing the language in the second part of the title on line 3, where it says authorizing the state treasurer, moving that to the Department of Revenue to hire consultants and requiring a study would probably be appropriate. I don't think there's anywhere where consultants are really necessary for the treasurer to begin holding $10 million. So I think that the amendment to the amendment should be to change line 3 to include, to strike state treasurer, replace it with Department of Revenue, and then page 3, line 1, the same, page 3, line 5, the same. Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so I want to make sure I've captured this. On page 1, then on line 3, it would say authorizing the Department of Revenue to study and report, to hire consultants requiring a study and report. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Representative Harrelson's amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay, that carries. Now on the amendment, this is the Pendergraft amendment. It's no longer to strike, so it's just changing, so we just voted on it actually, so I think we're covered there. Ms. Childress, do you have any questions about what we've done here?
Just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, it is page 1, line 3, strike state treasurer, change to Department of Revenue, and then the same on page 3, line 1, and line 5.
That would be accurate. Thank you. Okay. Any further discussion on page 3? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Childress, would you please take the roll?
Roll call vote, Senate File 96, do pass as amended. Representative Alaman? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Sherwood,
No.
Representative Smith excused, Chairman Bear.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 5 aye, 1 no, 1 excused.
Okay, thank you. It looks like Representative Allemand is a co-sponsor on this. Do you have a representative that you would like to manage this on the floor?
Mr. Chairman, I think, Representative Allemand, I've talked to a few other people that are big supporters of this bill, and I can get with Mr. Allemand and see how he wants to handle it from there, if that works for you guys. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you for being here, and that bill do pass. So Representative Allemand, unless I hear otherwise, you're going to be floor managing this bill. All right, thank you, and congratulations, Senator Ide.
Thank you very much.
Senator Hicks, welcome. Would you please give us the rundown on Senate File 168?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is going to be really short and sweet.
Even though the bill is not.
The bill is not, but it just does one thing, and so.
Please proceed.
If members of the body have a goldenrod in front of you, and you look at that front page, if we pass the bill out and it's signed in, the budget reserve account just goes away. It just repeals the budget reserve account, the current funds which are federal mineral royalties and severance taxes that flow into that will just flow into the general fund. But Mr. Chairman, members of the body, you guys are familiar with your data fiscal book, but I'll just read to you what the purpose of the budget reserve account was. This account was originally created as an intermediate savings account or rainy day fund. It's on page 31 if you get under the revenue section in there. But this describes what the original purpose was but currently, and then how as it operates now, the BRA currently serves as a secondary checking account against the general fund draws upon general operations of government. It's a secondary checking account to the general fund, and so it's kind of a legacy account that we've never looked back and said, do we still need it? We don't need it. And in fact, if you look at most of the appropriations, it's always referred to general fund budget reserve account, general fund budget reserve account. And so this is just a simplification. The bill does a couple of things. It's long because we reference budget reserve account and a lot of different statutory components. It just repeals budget reserve account. It provides for the transfer or reversions of any funds in the budget reserve account. And then it makes conforming amendments. In other words, there's some obligations on the budget reserve account that statutory language that just moves over onto the general fund. That's the making the conforming. And then we just repeal obsolete language. You know, you can turn it over and look at the fiscal note. Basically, it shows what we're doing is basically on an annual basis, revenues into the budget reserve account is about $365 million. That's just going to flow into the general fund. And we just use it as a secondary checking account right now, Mr. President. That's all the bill does. Stand for any questions.
Question for the mayor. We love these straightforward bills, and we love cleaning up and creating more transparency in our spending. Getting rid of accounts seems to be a good way to do that. I do have a question for you, Senator, on page 4. Actually, it's not really a question. I just really appreciate this clarification of language where we change from appropriated from to maintained in and calling it as a reserve in that general fund account. So you've really clarified what the purpose of that 5% is now. So appreciate that change in language there.
Yeah, and that maintains the 5% in the general fund now. Will have to be as far as the budgeting process. It'll carry that 5% into the general fund.
Okay. Now, obviously, the general fund is profilable by the executive, but so was the BRA account, is that right? So
That's
really,
exact-
no
that's-
difference there.
It's the same thing, that currently the governor has the opportunity to profile out of the budget reserve account, and conversations with the chief budget officer, he thought this was a significant simplification of just our budgeting system. Mr. Chairman, I think you're all aware of this, passed out of the Senate 31-0.
31-0. Let's hope we can get that on the House side. All right. Would you? Yeah, well, exactly. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Senator Guru, you're in the room. Would you like to opine on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, except that we've worked, the good Senator and I worked on this bill a couple of years. We've worked on this. And just as you said, this is just a transparency issue. And as you can see, the Senate was very much in favor.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. I assume that there's no other testimony in the room, so we'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill with due pass.
Move due pass by Alaman, seconded by Sherwood. All right, I'm not going to work this entire bill. I hope you've all reviewed it and know what the changes are that are in here. I've looked at it, I don't see anything nefarious, so it looks like a pretty straightforward repeal that account. So any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take the roll call vote. Ms. Childress, please.
Roll call vote, Senate File 168, do pass. Representative Alaman? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson? Aye. Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood? Aye. Representative Smith excused. Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 6 aye, 1 excused.
All right, that bill do pass. Yeah, I'm going to see if maybe somebody besides me wants to do that. All right, thank you very much. We are adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Sherwood.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to volunteer to do this.
Okay.
I may refer to it as the bra burning bill.
Better that you have that conversation with the body than me. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you. All right, good work, committee.